Okay, well, good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for coming and joining us. For some, it's 7 a.m. That's me. Others, it's 10 a.m. And 8 and 9 a.m. So I see a few people are kind of still making their way in. We have a lineup of 3 great presentations that we're excited about, 2 of which have been pre-recorded, which will be great. So the format of the paper panel today is we'll watch together as a group, just because there's not a ton of us. Together as a group, we will watch the presentation. Then we'll have about 5 to 10 minutes of discussion and questions. Then we'll watch the next presentation. Then we'll have 5 to 10 minutes of discussion. And because I didn't follow instructions, I will give my presentation that will go no longer than 10 minutes. And then we'll have 5 to 10 minutes of discussion. And then we should have about 20 minutes of discussion all together about all 3 presentations, and we'll get back to any questions that we weren't able to get to in the 5 to 10 minutes after each of the presentations. So we'll wait one more minute. We'll maybe wait till about 7:03, 7:04, and then we have a great presentation from colleagues at UCLA.
Hello, thank you so much for having us. My name is Christina Abagat Liboon, and I am a PhD student at UCLA's School of Education and Information Studies, and I am coming to you from the Tongva, Gabrielino, and Tataviam lands. And I am so excited to present today's topic with both of my Filipino sisters who are here in spirit, Roseanne and Ariana. And so we present to you Conceptualizing Reciprocity, Embodying Utang na Loob, Pakisama, and Alay-Alay as Pinoy Filipino-American researchers and evaluators. What we mean by Pinoy Filipina is that we 3 identify as heteronormative cisgender Filipino women. And so a background is that this project emerged really at the beginning of fall 2019 when Roseanne and myself began talking about our identities as researchers and evaluators and how reciprocity plays a larger role in our work. And we felt that very few Filipinas in our field exist in academia, educational research, and evaluation. So we connected with Ariana towards the end of that quarter. So really, we come to this work with a lot of joy and love and an approach in not only understanding ourselves, but other Pinays and Filipinas who similarly may feel in our community. And that said, we realize that while scholars use reciprocity when engaging in culturally relevant research and evaluation, what really remains is a gap of a clear definition of reciprocity situated in a specific cultural context that may cause a disconnect between the work we do and the communities that we intend to serve. We used a grounded theory approach to address this gap in literature as to how reciprocity has been defined and used. 3 Filipino concepts guided this conceptual framework: Pakisama, Utang na Loob, and Alay-Alay, which are all core pieces in having harmonious relationships with others. A part of understanding the 3 former terms mentioned in the last slide also means we need to conceptualize them within the framework of kapwa, which means seeing oneself in relation with and as a part of others. So in other words, kapwa can also be interpreted as a shared community that functions interdependently. So we discuss these concepts and how they influence positionalities as researchers and evaluators in the field, and how we approach and conceive our practice as professionals through these 3 research questions. We set out on this project intending to conduct a more in-person research study. In COVID-19, we began meeting online, and our work began to really take off with the autoethnographic piece. For the purposes of this short presentation, we focus on the open-ended responses of the survey and focus our analysis on the survey results. And we used en vivo and open coding to generate themes and are developing a codebook based on those themes. So for our results, there were 27 respondents. Of all respondents, 14 were researchers. There was 1 evaluator, and 5 indicated how they were both a researcher and an evaluator. 5 indicated that they were involved in another field. However, based on the responses, 11 indicated they were either an evaluator, researcher, and an evaluator, or involved in some evaluative activity. 21 people indicated that they were second-generation immigrant, meaning that they were born here in the US. 2 indicated they were 1.5 generation immigrant, that they immigrated here between the ages of 6 and 12. And 2 mentioned that they were first gen, meaning they immigrated after 18 years or older. 18 people mentioned they do not speak a Filipino language, and 5 said yes. Of the 5, they mentioned Tagalog, conversational Tagalog, and some Bisaya. So for our findings, we start with Pakisama, which is defined in the literature as maintaining smooth interpersonal relations. Our findings show that in maintaining a positive relationship with others, there is a dimension of being relationally savvy. So in order to be relationally savvy or have relational savviness, a person has to understand their positionality in relation to the other individual they are interacting with, in addition to the context in which that interaction exists. This respondent mentioned that Pakikisama is a way of life. They mentioned smooth interpersonal relations, but not on a surface level, as a way of being and maintaining these harmonious relationships to not hurt others. So in a sense, one has to be critically self-conscious or critically self-aware or have that critical sense of self-consciousness. So a person who can do Pakikisama really well needs to know the politics of the group. The next is Utang na Loob, which translates as debt of gratitude. And we conceptualize 3 sub-themes, obligation, responsibility, and gratitude in returning a favor or paying it forward. And while these are sub-themes, all 3 are really interconnected. This example encapsulates the essence of obligation, responsibility, and this idea of gratitude in returning a favor or paying it forward. And it's exciting because this idea of mentorship showed up for multiple survey participants. They mentioned this one in particular serving as a peer mentor for other evaluation consultants. And in return, because they benefited greatly, always willing to do the same for others. And the last one, Alay-Alay, means giving support, or more specifically, helping carry the weight of a burden of that of another individual and to move alongside them with them through their journey. So this Antheseo talks about it in a way of really this embodiment, feeling it, feeling your way through it. So similar to Utang na Loob, we found that the 3 sub-themes of support are interconnected and that they emerged as fortified, collective, and sustained support. This Pinay evaluator talks about working with direct service staff and how they moved alongside them, helping and supporting them, humanizing the data and working with direct service staff to really translate the data together. She saw it as helping to unburden while showing them the utmost respect, and really feeling the need to support direct service staff in ways that they are seen and heard. And by doing this, ensuring that, feeling that responsibility that they are represented in the data with leadership. And so while we have described so far sounds seemingly positive, our participants have also described how in practicing pakikisama, utang na loob, and alalay, that there can be negative effects. For example, resentment, and sometimes that things are uneven, unequal, or unbalanced in relationships where there is not a mutual understanding of what reciprocity looks like. For example, one person takes more than they can give and vice versa. Also, it emerged that another nuance was the translation. For example, utang translates to debt and loob translates to inside or one's inner self. And this concept is then embodied deeply within ourselves and our spirit. And so the English translation doesn't suffice because it's seen as a transaction at times, and that debt is seen as a transaction. And it places a colonial lens to the language when it relates to the exchange as a transaction. So if I were to retranslate it, I would say it's more like a gift from inside oneself. And also the generational and language differences. Second generation immigrants did not, well, not did not, but some of the terms didn't resonate with them as much, but first generation immigrants had a more deep conceptualization and operationalization of terms with specific examples in their practice. And so some of our assertions, we drew on the sun of the Filipino flag as inspiration for our conceptual model in conceptualizing reciprocity through Pakisama, Utang na Loob, and Alay-Alay within the framework of Kapwa, because the Filipino flag is a symbolic visual of the Filipinos' history of interdependence and strength as a community. And so these concepts are embedded in Kapwa, this again, awareness of shared identity and being with others. And the actions are interconnected and interdependent, and they exist in each other. In reciprocity, the feeling can be mismatched if both parties don't have a deep sense of reciprocity. And lastly, these terms contribute to a more nuanced understanding of reciprocity in practice through the epistemologies and approaches of Pinay or Filipino American evaluators and researchers. And we hope others in our field can begin interrogating epistemological stances, positionality, and approaches to research with a more contextually and culturally relevant lens that centers and contributes to their community's orientation and needs. Here are some of our references to share. And again, a very big thank you to you all and to the Pinay Filipina researchers and evaluators who took the time to respond to our survey. We are so deeply grateful. And thank you for inviting us to the space. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact us. And as we would say, we are finished in Tagalog, tapos na. Thank you so much, everyone. We look forward to discussing.
Excellent. And so we actually have Christine here with us. So Christine, it will be great if you could come on and we can take 8 or 9 minutes of questions and discussion for you before we move on to the next presentation. And then of course, we'll all have time to discuss the 3 presentations at the end. So thank you so much for that presentation.
Yeah, thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Happy to be here. I wish 2 of my colleagues were here because, we did this together and in community, but they couldn't make it. So just to clarify, Ayesha, if anybody has any questions, do I answer and respond, or do I talk a little bit more about my presentation? I'm open to either. So.
Yeah, well, we have about 8 or 9 minutes. So maybe we can start to see if anyone has any questions, and then otherwise you can kind of continue telling us. I mean, 11 minutes is really not a ton of time to talk about all of this important research. So actually, why don't you just go ahead and tell us a little bit more, and then if people have questions, they can pop them in the chat, or they can come off mute and you can answer them. But for now, maybe you can keep going for a little bit.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I had a whole presentation also just in case the video didn't work. And so one of the things that I did want to say is that, we come to this space through our positionality as like graduate students. And so what really brought us to this project was, and I explained it very briefly in the beginning, was Rosanna and I just starting to talk about like our work in academia and educational research, but also myself in like as an assistant evaluator and in evaluative spaces. But I was also like very interested in understanding like how a lot of our systems, in my perspective, are sick, and how we can use, like, not even use is the right word, but, being second generation Filipino American and not having a good grasp on the language, how we started to question things like that, and how some of the concepts that we feel deeply within ourselves and our bodies and our practices have just, like we practice it, but we don't know how to define it. And we, just began talking about like, well, what does that look like in our work and reciprocity? And so we wanted to also understand why the three of us, took a very non-traditional pathways in our community, because many of our family members and others in our community take up trades like nursing and healthcare and engineering, and or if they do go into education, they take up, trades like teaching, but our pathway to get to where we were was like very untraditional. And so one of the ideas that or some of the themes that came up when other researchers and evaluators were sharing were that, they really wanted to give back, and this idea of mentorship. And, we really felt deeply to want to do the same for others who might not know the traditional pathway, or, within the community, just feel pressured to take up the common, like well-known pathways. And so we started talking about that as well. And yeah, I don't know if anybody has any questions. I had some questions prepared in case we had time for discussion. And yeah, just, I guess, wanting to know how reciprocity plays out, in your practice as evaluators, and perhaps how from your own culture that may, be conceptualized in a nuanced way, but also, I'm pretty new to this space. This is my first CREA conference, and so yesterday hearing Dr. Lowe talk about the 4 Rs was like one of the first times I had heard about that, and so it was just like great to see that so much of our work also like intersects and overlaps. So yeah, thank you all. Please feel free to ask any questions or drop any comments in the chat.
Steve, I see you've come off mute. Did you want to share something?
Yeah. Hi. Thank you very much for this your presentation and sharing your work. I'm just curious about how, you mentioned some of the negative aspects of it, and that got me thinking about, well, what if somebody feels that there is an imbalance in the relationship there? In your research, did you talk about that and think or address, were there ways that came up that were considered to find ways to address that? And was that a mutually felt feeling, or was it something that people flagged as one person felt it but not the other? So it's an awareness question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's part of some of the concepts is like when engaging in reciprocity, especially the concept of Pakisama, which is like this relational savviness, is this like really deeply rooted sense of like critical self-awareness, sometimes to a fault, where you're like, oh, constantly questioning the interaction with, I could see how that might play out with evaluators or like researchers, like, did I do that right? Did I, and we do engage in this like self-reflexivity, but I think some of the respondents that did share through the survey, a lot of the negative aspects took place in more personal examples, like how the idea of like Utang na Loob, that transactional piece and wanting to like give back. A couple people mentioned that they saw it like play out much more with like their families or like their grandparents sending like remittances back to like the Philippines because they felt like they had to. And, you know, it's also part of the third idea of Alay-Alay, this like idea of like burden bearing and support that plays out in the three different ways of, just feeling like it's like an obligation, but like you do it because it's part of the community, it's part of the kapwa. And so that's part of it. I think if we had more respondents, it would have been good to see like how that plays out in a professional setting as like an evaluator researcher more, but I can see, actually one of the respondents also mentioned that, you know, taking on like a lot of additional tasks, even though they know that it's not part of their own, like the roles, like regular roles and responsibilities, because they know that it'll help to create that harmonious relationship within the community that they're working with or their partners. And so, yeah, I hope that answers your question. And thank you so much, Steve. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thanks so much, Christine. There's a question for you in the chat. Maybe you can answer in the chat if about how to access your study as we have Cecilia go ahead and gear up the next presentation. Thank you so much.
Perfect.
But stay on, we're going to come back. There'll be more time for discussion. And thanks for your question, Steve. And Cecilia, whenever you're ready, we can get the second presentation going.
Welcome, everyone, to our research report on the impacts of culturally responsive pedagogy and urban immersion experiences for pre-service special education teachers. I'm here today with Dr. Mark Zablocki from Illinois State University, Dr. April Mustian from Winthrop University, formerly from Illinois State University, and I'm Debbie Shelden at Illinois State University. We've all been faculty members in the Innovative Network for Future Urban Special Education Teachers, which is an emphasis program in our pre-service special education program. Before we talk about the study, I want to give you an overview of the urban teacher preparation model at Illinois State University that is housed under the National Center for Urban Education at ISU. The first and foremost is that social justice informs this program. All that we do in NQ and Infuse is really there to promote equity in our communities, equity in our school systems, and so all of that informs our program. The next is that community voice and context are critical. One of the things that we work to do within ourselves and with our students is to reframe whose knowledge matters. And so immersive experiences early and often occur with community scholars in our partner communities. Culturally relevant teaching is intentional in core courses. So we spend time purposely designing our courses to demonstrate culturally relevant teaching. And then finally, professional development and embedded course activities are there to promote development of critical self-awareness and socio-political contexts. So urban redesign courses start out with faculty being engaged in extensive professional development in a cohort model with immersive experiences of their own in that PD. That they then go through a process of redesigning courses so that course learning outcomes, materials, and assessments reflect the central tenets of our program, of the Urban Ed program. And then our pre-service teachers typically in these courses participate in an immersion activity in one of our partner neighborhoods in Chicago, most typically through one-day trips. Those immersion activities are co-planned by the faculty member, a community liaison, and a staff member from the National Center for Urban Education. Those immersion activities include experiences both in the public schools of the neighborhood and also in community organizations and other community assets in the neighborhood. They include conversations with community scholars. So again, reframing whose voice matters. So our students are meeting with community organizers, community leaders in those neighborhoods. And then finally, the learning outcomes for an immersion activity are tied specifically to the course. So there's an alignment between the course standards and the urban learning outcomes for the trip.
And so we wanted to explore, is the work that we're doing really changing students' preparedness to become special educators in urban areas and in many of our partner communities in Chicago and beyond. So we wanted to determine if the course integrated culturally relevant immersive experiences in those urban settings that Debbie described would impact our candidates along three primary variables: their intentions for urban teaching, their attitudes towards diversity, and their urban teaching self-efficacy. And we also wanted to look at factors such as our candidates' race, gender, the type of high school they themselves attended, the number of urban redesigned courses they had taken, their knowledge that the course was an urban redesigned course. This was important for us simply because we're a very large program. Sometimes our students select a section of a course because it fits their schedule and isn't paying attention to the fact that it may have been an urban redesigned course. And so we wanted to know if, that intention, knowing that the course was urban redesigned, impacted our teacher candidates along those three areas. And then the number of immersive experiences, does that impact separately or distinctly from the other variables that we looked at? And our primary survey instrument is one that was developed by researchers within the National Center for Urban Ed at ISU. There are some demographic items, but also a subscale for urban teaching intentions that was developed by our researchers at NQ. And then two subscales that were modified from prior research: the attitudes towards diversity subscale and the urban teaching self-efficacy subscale. And reliability data had already been conducted on this survey instrument prior to our study, and so we wanted to provide that data here. Our participants were 717 teacher candidates in our program across 4 years. The majority were white and female, which is fairly representative of our current teaching demographics across the country.
So our methods, the pre-service teachers or our candidates were surveyed at both the beginning and the end of the semester as a larger part of this NQ project. We collected 1,242 surveys over a 4-year period with those 717 pre-service teachers who were enrolled in our special education undergraduate program. Many of those students took more than one redesign courses and therefore did an extra 2, 3, 4 surveys. We conducted paired sample t-tests to examine differences or overall differences between pre and post-test scores on 3 independent variables that April just described. And then an ANOVA with some post hoc comparison tests to look at the effects of 4 different independent variables on those 3 variables. These are the results of the paired sample t-test. Okay, we have got the 3 dependent variables on the left. The pre-test scores are also on the left, and the post-test scores reflect the difference between the post-test, pre-test and post-test reflect that t-score. So we were testing the difference between the pre-test and the post-test change. So for urban, or intentions of urban teaching, there was a significant effect there. Attitudes towards diversity, there was a slight gain, a very small gain between pre and post test, and that was not significant. And then teaching efficacy was also significant in terms of students' scores on both the pre and post test. We also wanted to look at comparisons between different independent variables and the effects that they might have had on those dependent variables. So in terms of, or to address intentions of urban teaching, the most impactful variable there was the number of immersion trips that students or the pre-service teachers had taken. Okay, that could have been anywhere from 1 all the way up to 6 or 7 trips. A few students did take quite a few trips. Previous school had a significant impact. And again, this was whether or not students went to urban, suburban, or rural schools. So if students went to an urban school, they had higher scores on the intentions for urban teaching. If The pre-service teachers knew that the course was urban prior to taking it, so they intentionally took that course. So not surprisingly, that was also associated with higher intentions of urban teaching, of course. And the only variable that impacted our teaching efficacy was whether or not pre-service teachers knew that the course that they were taking was an urban redesign course. So our results show that intentions for urban teaching had the most significant gains. The number of immersion experiences was associated with a higher IUT score. Students who intentionally took urban courses, so those who knew that what they were taking had higher teaching efficacy scores than those who didn't. The number of infused courses did not have a statistically significant effect on IUT or TE. And then urban immersive experiences taken in conjunction with urban redesign courses led to more significant increases in IUT compared to urban redesign courses content alone without that immersion trip.
So the next stage of our work, one thing we hope to do is additional analysis to dig a little bit deeper in the number of immersion trips and to look at that data much more closely. Second, we want to examine the impacts of urban immersion experiences that are programmatically embedded but not integrated into a single redesign course. So what if these trips came outside of a course, but were still intentional with identified learning outcomes? And then finally, we think it might be time to revisit the appropriateness of the current instruments we're using to consider modifications that might better align to the ways in which our urban model has evolved over time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and I believe, thank you so much, Mark, Debbie, and April for your presentation. And I believe, yep, Mark is here. I think Debbie is here as well.
Here.
So maybe if you all can share a little bit more about your findings or anything else that you want to share with us, and then we'll also field questions and comments.
Yeah, I think for me, one thing I'll say is I think that as we went back and looked at this data from, and Mark will have to pitch in on how many years it's been, really noticing, this arose out of a university-wide program that we then built up a bit in our department. And I think that we had mentioned at the end of the recorded presentation, the need to really go back to those tools, the instruments that we use to evaluate students' experiences, that we need to take the data we have now, but also we have much more in-depth experience now working on our own culturally responsive practices, doing critical friendships among the infused faculty to talk about what we're doing. And so I think that as a department team within this bigger university program, we have some different ideas about the kinds of items that we might want to try out in those instruments. The other thing that I would say, and this got mentioned briefly in the recorded presentation, but really trying to find a way to not only implement the program, but evaluate the program that can find the voices of students in our program. We are a primarily white institution, and I don't think our current tools are allowing us to hear the voices of the few Black, Indigenous, well, I don't know that we have had Indigenous students in our program, the Black students and the Latinx students in our program, as well as trying to really look at the differences for our students. We're primarily working with Chicago Public Schools. And so how are our students who are alum of Chicago Public Schools specifically experiencing our program?
Yeah, just to piggyback on what Debbie was saying about the data, that goes back about 3 or 4 years or so, and was part of a larger university initiative that included not only our department, but several other departments on campus. And I think one of the things we were looking at as we're doing this quantitative analysis was sort of the utility of, well, does significance mean as far as our findings? And it suggests a lot of, I think, certain directions that students are going in, but like Debbie was saying, trying to find some tools, more qualitative tools where we can drill in a little bit deeper as to how students are benefiting from our classes, how they're benefiting from these immersion trips to Chicago. Debbie was saying a lot of our students are from suburban Chicago, from rural Chicago, who have very limited perceptions of the city of Chicago and of urban issues. So we try to kind of break down some of the myths around and stereotypes around urban teaching with the students, and part of that is why we do the trips. But I think that going back to the data collection is really kind of refining our tools and trying to get some more qualitative data to get a better understanding or a broader understanding of how students are being impacted by our classes and by these trips. So if anybody has any questions, we'd be happy to take them now, or we can take them after our last presentation.
Well, Mark and Debbie, thank you so much for your presentation, and thank you for your reflections. I really appreciate your thoughts about kind of needing to go follow up and getting additional data, especially from groups whose voices might not have been heard. Looks like Pamela has a question, so maybe you can answer that, and then we'll hop over to the next presentation.
The implications of our findings to teacher recruitment, that's a great question. I'm not sure that we have data on that. Debbie, can you, do you have any insight into that?
I'm not sure that the data that we presented here speaks specifically to that. I think that the larger university initiative, there is a teacher recruitment component in the larger urban ed initiative at the university. And that component is a series of opportunities to connect current CPS students who are considering teaching, to connect them with current students at our university for kind of a little peer dialogue about teacher recruitment, and then some visits to campus. So that's built in. I don't know what the evaluation of that particular part of the Urban Initiative program here is looking like. I will say, outside of the data that we just presented, one of the things, as our infused faculty have engaged in critical self-study and reflection in our teaching, we are, this is being recorded, so hold on a second. We are a primarily white institution that has not made sufficient progress on being a safe and welcoming environment for students who are not white, or for students who are disabled students. So I think that right now, teacher recruitment from CPS students, and particularly Black Chicago public school students, to come to our program is actually stymied because of the work that we have failed to do at our university to be a more just and equitable space. And so the implications are, like, we can continue to try to do this, but right now we are primarily serving non-Chicago public school alum and primarily white teacher candidates to think about their own critical theory and possibly teaching in urban spaces. But I think that we're going to have to do more work at our university to be a program that's appealing. Now, we do have a new program with the city colleges of Chicago, so the community college system in Chicago, Illinois. We have a program that just started this summer where it's CPS, Chicago Public Schools students, having a program where they transition into city colleges for their first 2 years, and then they finish their program with ISU, but with many of the courses and services of ISU being offered at the City College of Chicago. And so as we're just in the very first group of that, and that's a few different majors, but that might assist us with teacher recruitment. Sorry, I babbled a lot.
Thank you both, and I appreciate your candor, Debbie.
Yeah, well, privilege of tenure.
There you go. That's right.
Hi, I had a question.
So why don't we have, okay, Matthew, do you have a question?
Yeah, why did you pick study on special education teachers?
We are faculty members in the Department of Special Education. So again, the Urban Ed Initiative at our university, we have 40 some teacher prep programs at our university. And many of them have been involved in the Urban Initiative in different ways. We focused on special education because we are faculty in the Department of Special Education, and because special ed teachers are a critical shortage in our state, and a critical shortage in Chicago public schools.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. Well, hang on in here. We'll come back for a full group discussion. Okay, so I will go ahead and present now. And as some of you might have seen, I have an 8-week-old, so I apologize. I wasn't attending to my email as closely as I could have, so I didn't record my presentation in advance. So I have my timer. I'm gonna keep to time. And I will just share my screen here. And so the title of my presentation is Strategies for Mentoring and Advising Graduate Students of Color. In our time together, I'm going to briefly introduce myself, share a few caveats, talk a little bit about the background of this work, and then share 5 strategies. So just a bit about myself. I'm Black American and Panamanian, or Afro-Latina. I am a cisgender woman. I'm a wife, a mother, and recently promoted to associate professor, and I co-direct an evaluation and research laboratory. So just a couple of caveats. Much of what I present may not just be relevant for students of color. And while white graduate students and their minoritized peers are similar in terms of their capacity and capability, their journeys are unique due to the intervening effects of racism. And so I've attempted to kind of offer some contextualized examples, even though they may seem generic. I also recognize that neither persons of color nor their experiences are homogenous. There are kind of subjective and objective differences between groups, and there are also kind of different group-specific assumptions and biases across different ethnicities and races, and I recognize that. However, I've just specifically chosen the narrow focus of racism and race because some of my previous research and other research has shown that, especially for evaluators of color, their identity that is most salient to them is their ethnic background or their race. I also want to just say that this is kind of a larger piece of a puzzle, and that, there are systems of power, there are problems with recruitment for graduate students, there needs to be looking at climate, as I appreciate Debbie had just talked about, for graduate students and undergraduate students, and there needs to be a review of policies. But this is kind of my take on what those who are in kind of an advisor mentorship role can do. But I understand that there are kind of other intervening factors as well. So, all graduate students experience heightened stress and increased demands on their time. They are at increased risk of developing psychological and physical health problems just by being in graduate school. However, high quality mentoring can help negate these negative experiences and increase psychological risks while also supporting enrollment, retention, graduation, and job placement. So graduate students from historically, I'm going to stop saying minoritized and stop saying historically. I saw something on Twitter that says systematically, which I think is much more accurate. So graduate students from systematically marginalized groups uniquely encounter isolation, fear, distrust, betrayal, and microaggressions. And they also experience education violence, which is defined as the structural, cultural, and direct systems of schooling that account for how higher education has become an engine of racial hierarchy and white supremacy, ultimately limiting and taking Black and other marginalized lives. And Mustafa has a great article about this, if you're interested in learning a little bit more about that. And so some of the foundations for these strategies, this presentation, back when I submitted this, I was working on a paper, which is now published. So I'll share the information for the paper in the Canadian Journal of Program Evaluation back 2 years ago when we were kind of submitting our presentations for this conference for 2020. But the foundations really for this work are in critical race theory, which I know has become this whole thing in schools, in culture relevant pedagogy, in critical pedagogies, in anti-deficit orientations, and really just on research that I was able to find in higher education and the field of evaluation, but a lot also on personal reflections as well, as having been a graduate student of color at one point. So there are really 5 strategies that I want to share with you all. And I'm just going to briefly go over each of them because of time. But again, we'll have some time for questions at the end. And also I have a paper that's been published on this fairly recently that we could talk through. So let's just jump. We can just go ahead and jump right in. So the first is to consider the impact of vicarious trauma. So, while it's important to acknowledge and events that have happened in public life, repeated exposure to racial violence can trigger the same symptoms as post-traumatic stress disorder, especially for people of color. And so research on professionals who work in high stress and trauma-induced fields has deepened our really understanding of the impact of vicarious traumatization and secondary traumatic stress. These are 2 kind of terms that have been termed from the psychological field. And recent literature has suggested that people of color are especially susceptible to experiencing vicarious trauma. And so I argue that advisors of evaluation graduate students, and really any graduate students of color, should create spaces for students to express their feelings, and if they choose, to be vulnerable and open about the stressors of what it means to be a person of color in higher education, as white supremacy is just woven into the everyday fabric of our lives. And for example, you can present opportunities in class to kind of discuss some of these issues if students are interested. I will also make time and make myself available if students don't want to talk in front of other students about what they're feeling or about what their experience is. In my paper, I overview kind of experience that I had back when I was at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro back in 2016 after Kevin Lamont Scott's murder, where students of color came into my office, and it was obvious that all of us were kind of just having these really intense feelings. And obviously, of course, many people were having these feelings after George Floyd's killing. And so just making spaces, I like to call them open door and closed door conversations. The second is to assist with the facilitation of peer and mentors or squads. And so for those who are not familiar with the term squad, it's kind of a group of people who have your best interests at heart or who are kind of in solidarity with you and your experiences. I was fortunate enough to have this throughout my career. So in graduate school, the top left picture are people who I was in graduate school with at University of Illinois. And these other pictures are people who I've been able to kind of form deep relationships with as I was on my tenure track or tenure earning journey. And so research with African-American doctoral students has suggested that mutual peer support from those with similar backgrounds can increase feelings of self-reliance. And similar findings have been self-reported by faculty of color. And so while peer support systems are critical, Evaluation graduate students of color should also have access to multiple mentors. So kind of having a whole squad of people who can support them through their journey. No one mentor, no one colleague can kind of fill all of your needs, and so it's really important to think about having multiple mentors and multiple peer groups as well. This is incredibly important, and I appreciate the first presentation, I think, kind of touched on this, is the importance of kind of culture. And it's really important that we honor and celebrate and respect our students' cultures and heritages and their religion, right? And the importance of the role of the family for some. This is a picture of my husband. He's Nigerian American. And so, you know, studies from students who are Latinx, Asian, Indigenous, and Black ethnicities have highlighted the role that spirituality and family plays in their lives. A study of Chicana doctoral students, for example, found that active family socialization assisted them when they encountered messages of unworthiness. Native American and Indigenous graduate students have described the meaningful role that spirituality plays in their resilience and internal development. And Christianity and family unit have prominent places in Black and Latinx cultures. And so it's just really important that we consider these. I try to have students let me know when they have cultural events or religious holidays, and I try to really be thoughtful about that. It's easy to acknowledge things like, you know, Christmas or maybe even Passover, but we have lots of students from various backgrounds who, you know, maybe they need a little bit of extra time or to be thoughtful if they're fasting during the religious time. And so I think all of those things are kind of incredibly important. In the paper, I share an experience where I've had a student who was actually shot. It was a long story, but it happened and it was an accidental shooting. And so when I showed up at the hospital to them, I knew that they were Christian and that they were deeply religious. And so I took the opportunity to pray with them, and you know, they're fine, which is, I'm really happy about that. But I think all of those kind of things where you take the time to learn a bit about your advisees and to learn about them. I had a colleague who did my PhD at Urbana-Champaign, which is about 2.5 hours south of Chicago. And she was from Chicago, and like every weekend for her first year, she would drive back and forth to Chicago because it was so important that she spent weekends with her family. And a lot of colleagues and professors kind of couldn't understand that. But I remember her just saying, like, this is important to me. This is one of the reasons why I chose this institution, was because I wanted to be close. And she's now moved back to Chicago after you know, receiving her PhD. And so those are the type of things that we really need to be thoughtful of and attentive to as advisors and mentors. Another thing is to really be vigilant of microaggressions and microvalidations, probably most, or microaffirmations, I've also heard termed as well. And so many of us are familiar with the term microaggressions, which is like, you know, these incidents where it's kind of like also termed 1,000 little cuts. So someone may say something about you, but it's kind of like a little bit of a put down. So as an African-American, I have very naturally curly hair, but I wear my hair, as you can see today, it's in braids. Sometimes it's in an afro, sometimes it's in twists, sometimes it's straightened out. I've had people say to me when my hair is straight, wow, you look really professional today. Meaning that when my hair looks closer to, you know, what, you know, natural European hair would look like, straight, then somehow I look more professional than how my hair comes out my head naturally, right? And so that would be a microaggression. So someone's kind of giving me a bit of a compliment, but really you're putting down what my hair normally looks like, or what, you know, kind of my ethnic background. And so there are students who are from many different backgrounds, students who are from different religions, students who are from different nationalities, students who are from various sexualities, right? Who experience these all the time. And so one thing is for us to stick up as advisors and say, well, what did you mean by that? Or kind of have these important conversations with our colleagues, maybe not necessarily calling them out in front of the student, but I've had kind of hallway conversations saying, well, you know, actually, you said this, and I just want you to know that that could have actually been perceived as offensive because of this person's background. And so kind of the flip side of the coin is practicing micro validations, which is something, research that I've learned about 6 years ago, which I try really hard to practice in my mentoring and advising. It's really like these validating who students believe they can be. So saying things in person, in public and in private about how they've done such a good job, and not kind of lying, but making an extra effort to tell them when they've done a good job, or making an extra effort to tell them, oh, I noticed you did this, and that is really the type of thing that we're looking for in graduate students or in our fields, right? And so those sorts of kind of intentional opportunities to address excuse me, it's super early here, microaggressions, and to practice microvalidations are incredibly important. And so finally, it's important that we develop mentoring competence, right? One of the things that I have told my colleagues is I cannot be the only mentor of Black students, right? Like I need to feel confident that my colleagues who are not Black can be great mentors and advisors of students of color. And so it is an honor and a great responsibility to make sure that we recruit students of color and students from other backgrounds, but also that we retain them and make sure that they have a great experience. And so it's important that that burden doesn't just fall upon those who have similar backgrounds. And so to do this, it's important that we go through our own training, we go through our own reflection, we go through our own professional development. I've attended a number of professional development seminars. One that was particularly important to me was by the NIH, the National Institute of Health, where they talked about how to give and receive difficult feedback, which, man, that really changed my style of mentoring when I attended that workshop. So that's incredibly important. So we're at time, so I'm just gonna stop here, but happy to take questions or comments, or I can spend kind of 5 minutes talking a little bit more, and then we can spend some time as a group discussing these 3 presentations and just discussing culturally relevant pedagogy as a group together. Hi, Lori.
I actually have a question, so if that's okay.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for your presentation. And so mentoring anybody is an area where I just feel like so ill prepared, and it's something, so I'm not faculty, so I work with a few students, but it's mostly a matter of staff and a few graduate students that people really want. And I feel like I don't feel like I've ever really got good mentoring. I've certainly never gotten any professional training, and I just feel so ill-equipped to mentor anybody, let alone students of color or staff of color. So you mentioned the NIH training that you got that was especially helpful, and I was just wondering if you could share other ways that have really helped you develop as a mentor that you could share with those of us who really need that. We need to figure out how to do it.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks so much for your question, Lori. And I think this is kind of relevant to like as you said, it's relevant as staff, to relevant, not just to graduate students. Some of this is relevant to undergraduate students as well. And they have kind of like their own unique set of things that they need help with as well, in addition to kind of graduate students. But so I found that I have learned the most from reading articles, which is funny because I know that as an evaluator or as a scholar, like we have our own field, but sometimes we just get stuck in reading our own research. And really, as I kind of had the idea for this article, which has kind of been like rumbling around in my head for probably 5 or 6 years. So back when I was wrapping up my PhD, I thought, man, I really wish I had this, or this was, or these were some things that were really great. And so doing the literature review for this article really was one of the most influential aspects, I would say. And so I'm happy to share this PowerPoint in the community resources, because some of the articles literally that I was able to reference say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, here are things that you should really be thoughtful of. And I try to also do that in my article. And so kind of keeping in mind like what the literature said. So different people from these groups find these sorts of things important, or these types of things were really impactful, I think has been really useful. And then I think it's hard to find, if I'm being honest, I think it's hard to find really good professional development around mentoring. When I first started as an assistant professor, I went to my chair and said, I'm starting a lab. How do I run this lab, right? And then there's kind of like this lab management piece, but then there's also this mentorship piece. And, to which he replied, well, I don't know. I just kind of did it. And then I went to people in other chairs in other departments, right? I talked to the psychology department chair. I talked to the biology department chair, and I said, well, what type of mentoring are you giving your new faculty? And they're like, well, they just do it, which is really scary, right? Like all of these people who are mentoring and having such a profound impact in people's lives are not having great professional development. So I wish I could say, well, go to this resource. I think there are some great resources. The National Faculty Development Center has good resources for those who aren't faculty as well. And I think kind of just like we all have extra time, but I think kind of reading articles and reading reflections, I think is incredibly useful.
Thank you.
Yeah. Let's see. Oh, yeah. Thanks, Christine. I definitely remember that and glad I'm no longer in that space. But I mean, these kind of what I've talked about are definitely relevant. I think are at all kind of phases of anyone's career, and thinking about not only what it means to be a good mentor, but a lot of what I presented also is what it means to be a good colleague, right? So thinking about how we interact with colleagues who have different backgrounds from us. And again, I've kind of focused on race, but certainly, as I mentioned, there's lots of other intersecting identities that are really important. Everyone has identities of power and privilege, as well as identities that can have allow them to have been kind of systematically oppressed, right? And so kind of being thoughtful about that and acknowledging our own power and privilege, as well as thinking about areas that, our colleagues have had. Christine, do you want to come off mute?
No, I just want to say thank you for that comment, because it sometimes, like midway through, you're like, I just, I'm going through it is the best way to say it. And it just is nice to always see that, from the mentor side, that yes, we're here to support you, but there are all these other dynamics at play. So thank you. Thank you for this.
Yeah. I think one thing that not enough people pay attention to is like the psychological health of students, right? And the mental health of students. I mean, the reports of and incidences, especially during COVID, but even before the pandemic, of graduate student suicide and graduate student depression is absolutely insane. And when you're a graduate student, like you feel like you know this, but then, you get out and you're kind of doing your things, or you feel like your family doesn't understand. And so I think it's really important that we kind of acknowledge that this is an increased and incredibly stressful time for people who already have other things going on in their lives, right? So I think and kind of, I look back at my dissertation and I think, oh, it was just another study. But like in the moment, it was like the thing, right? It's like this thing that loomed over me. And now I look back and I'm like, oh, that was just another study. But at the time when you're doing it, it just seems like this huge mountain. And so it's important that we acknowledge that, but while also figuring out how to support and move our students forward. So great. So we have about 20 minutes left together. I think it would be great if we could have a conversation. I think we have a couple of options. We could certainly go to breakout rooms and kind of discuss this in smaller groups, so folks don't have to feel like we have to kind of talk all together in person. Or we could have a whole group discussion. There's not that many of us. Let's see, there's about a little over 20 of us. So, and I think Christine has shared, she had some prompts. I have some thoughts. I'm sure Debbie and Mark maybe have some follow-up thoughts that we could share. So I don't know, we can either do a vote or I can make an executive decision. Sometimes people really love breakout rooms, and then sometimes people feel zoomed out and don't want to have to turn on their camera and talk early in the morning. And I want to respect both of those perspectives as well. Okay, we have one vote for stay together. So let's go that route. So any additional kind of thoughts about the importance of culturally relevant or responsive pedagogy, whether it be for students, whether it be in interacting with our colleagues. Does anyone have any kind of experiences that they would like to share or have us talk through as a group, where I can share or post some additional prompts? But any additional kind of thoughts or anything that wants to share?
This is Debbie. I actually, first of all, just want to thank you, Dr. Boyce, for that presentation. It was so timely for me right now. I mean, I think it's probably been timely forever and will be timely for a long time to come, but having had this week a few one-on-one conversations with Black women in different graduate programs at our university, and listening to the experiences and the crisis that they're feeling right now. And so thank you for this work. I think it's got me thinking about how to try to pull together some people from around campus to share this work and some of the sources that you cited, so that we can be more intentional rather than say, oh, yes, I understand you're experiencing that, but to do the actual other work and the more difficult work of growing our own capacity to mentor students and support students. So I just want to thank you for that work.
Yeah, thank you so much, Debbie. I think it's interesting because there's been this push, and there continues to be this push to kind of recruit people from various backgrounds, but really the tragedy associated with that is that sometimes there's no follow-up, right? So let's work to get them here, and then they're here, and then, okay, well, they're here. So, and then maybe they're giving kind of like technical support or these other types of support, but really us not taking the time to be thoughtful about the climate that we're creating for them, right? I mean, it's in some ways, it's even more problematic to get them and then introduce them to what we know. There's lots of studies on, like, this chilly climate, or are they, if we can actually, turn them away from fields. I've done multiple interviews with students, undergraduate and graduate students, who've had such a bad experience that they're like, yeah, I'm probably not going to stay in this field, which which is really a tragedy, which is horrible, I think, because we know that the right mentor, peer or otherwise, can be the difference between someone staying and being successful and someone going. And so it's hard because that's a huge responsibility, right? As Lori has mentioned, in addition to all of our other responsibilities that we have. So it's just kind of something for us to continue to be thoughtful about.
And I think that holds beyond recruitment applies also to what we were talking about with our undergraduate students, like knowing that our schools can benefit from having more teachers of color, more disabled teachers, and yet I struggle sometimes with how do I ethically attempt to recruit students to an environment that I know is so harmful. And there's no easy answer for that, but I do think from undergraduate students through graduate students to our colleagues, what is the environment that we're going to create that is not just safe, but an environment in which people can thrive and grow.
Go for it, Lori.
So I'm going to throw out my very specific situation and hope that others it will resonate at some level, that if you have any advice. So I am a director of a center, so not an academic program, and this year we're supporting with full tuition supported associateships a master's female Latinx student and a male African PhD student. So they are in different programs, but they each work in our center. They don't work at all together. And in COVID, almost no one's at our center anyway. And so, I feel, great that we're able to support them financially, which I think is huge, but it's obviously not everything. So like, I don't know, like, I feel like I should be doing something to show extra support in whatever mentoring, but I have no idea what to do, or what I should do, or what I can do to, beyond, we have the associateship, and we have, I don't work so much with the PhD student directly right now. But I am, as the director of the center, I am kind of responsible, like, for him. Like, he's, like, I sign his timesheets, but like, is there anything that I can do to make, I don't know, not make sure, but I think you get it. Like, what should I do beyond, like, here's your giving feedback on work,
I can say a couple thoughts. Christine might have some thoughts, or others might have thoughts as well. But I mean, so I would say making sure that you're practicing these acts of micro-validation, which seems like such a small thing, but Laura, you're in the STEM field. I can't tell you, I have interviewed students whose like PI has like never once told them good job or thank you for your work, which absolutely blows my mind. But literally, I've interviewed postdocs who have literally never experienced that, right? So it seems like yeah, that's like the humankind thing to do. But those sorts of things, I mean, and only real things, right? Like, don't make up things. But if they do something good, like sometimes I have to remember in a fast pace, like I have to tell my students, like, oh, but just like that was a good job. Here's like 15 revisions, but like that was such a good draft. Like, thank you so much, right? I think also creating spaces to kind of have difficult conversations. There's always some horrible event going on in our world that impacts people from different backgrounds. And so not everyone wants to come to work and talk about it, but some people are really struggling. And so, creating a space to say, oh, are there kind of, especially after big things have happened, are there certain events that people want to talk about, or right now, I remember when there was kind of increased focus on the killing of women from Asian backgrounds, right, and Asian ethnicities, I made space in my class to say, I just want to acknowledge that this is happening. I'm not from this background, but it impacts all of us. It's disgusting. It makes me angry. And I just want you all to know that I stand with you in solidarity. I don't know what it's like to experience this, but I know that some of you are struggling with this. And like that opened like this floodgate of people who wanted to just talk about it. People who want, and some were from, Asian ethnicities, although like, again, labeling people who are from Asia, like so many different ethnic backgrounds, I'll acknowledge that. To put them into one group is tough, as it is with any, but people were like, wow, I can't, like, this is like a methods class, that's not the focus of this class, but this is what people are feeling, right? Or yeah, I just want to say, like, oh, my uncle passed away from COVID and I'm really feeling it. And I know a lot of you all are feeling it. And so I just want to acknowledge that this is going on in the backdrop of what's happening in our lives. Like, we're in this point where we're like, I don't know that we're over the pandemic, but we're going to just pretend like we're over it, right? For some of us. And so that's really scary. I have a 8-week-old and a 3-year-old, and neither of them can be vaccinated. And so that, I think about that all the time. And so some things I say to my students in our meetings, I just say, I just want you to know this is something I'm struggling with. And I know that this is happening in your lives too. So I try to practice this, like, showing them that, like, people in, I'm going to do this, powerful positions can feel vulnerable, can have things going on. And just like sometimes someone just acknowledging this, I think, is really important. I also believe in kind of these informal, but I also believe in formal acknowledgments. So like in your role, Lori, like sending, if you send the email to everyone in the center saying, hey, I'm just letting everyone know that these things are happening. Let's remember to be kind to each other. Let's remember, here are some resources when it comes to microaggressions. Like, so some of it's like not just like what you can do for the student, right? But it's what you can do just for the environment to remind people. And you probably already do all this. This is like probably nothing new, but just kind of my initial thoughts, like just creating a space and but formally in your important role as well, just saying that I care about these things and we all should care about these things as well, I think can be really important. Or I attended this really great talk, not this one, maybe some other one. Everyone should check this out because it reminds us that it's important to, be thinking about our colleagues of color, or be thinking about the struggles of our LGBTQIA colleagues like those sorts of things. Formally sending out emails with resources, as well as kind of having these informal and hallway conversations, I think are so important.
Thank you so much. That is really helpful.
I just had a thought, like, I don't know if this is too close to, but I've worked in Chicago public schools. I work with from K to 12, and some students in high school that are really interested in STEM or science or mathematics, their teachers usually tell them, like, you're not going to graduate in the university because what we taught you is not at the level of other students that you're going to come that aren't from the urban setting. And a lot of the students, after a couple semesters, come back and visit us at the high school, and they're like, yeah, they're right. Everybody else is far more advanced than us. And then that's where all the ideas of being inadequate, like feeling marginalized, feeling like not equal to, can compound, and the investment they made in the school and all the hard work they did in high school didn't meet to match what everybody else is at. So I can see like how that can affect mental health. And if you're just like a first generation college student, you can't share that experience with anybody. And some people just don't understand where you're coming from. So that's like, so if I can't do mathematics, what I really loved, or STEM, like what can I do? So that's always questioning. And I only have a BFA, so I don't know how it is to be in a master's or a doctorate. So that's some experience I've heard, and anecdotally with even some of my coworkers too.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. Ladson Billings, in her article, which is still relevant, but from, I think, the mid-90s, kind of talks about this idea of kind of acknowledging where students are coming from and appreciating that. And there's also this idea of like cultural capital. And so that different people have different things to bring to the table, so that they may not have, I don't know, taken calculus as while they were in high school. But there are so many other things, life experiences that they bring that are so important to the field. I mean, when we think especially about STEM fields, and we often, right where you're talking about, lose students in the pathway to stay in these fields when they're undergraduate students. We know that when any field, but especially STEM, are more homogenous, then sometimes there's like a lack of innovation. There's it's good to have different people from different life experiences to come and help with, idea generation and innovation. And so those are the types of things that I try to tell students who say, well, oh, I didn't take algebra in 8th grade, which apparently is like one of the #1 predictors of if you're going to go on to get a college degree. Well, that's true, but you did sit down and have family meals, or you did help change the oil in your car with your grandfather. Like, these are things that are really, really important, and that ultimately can lead to success. And so I try to remind students that all sorts of backgrounds and all sorts of experiences are important for all sorts of fields. And it's okay to not have, had parental involvement, or it's okay to have, 2 fathers, right? Like, all of these things make us who we are, and we need, it takes all kinds to make a world. And especially when it comes to fields where people are all the same, like those fields are in need of people from different backgrounds to come and help them think through various ideas. And so I appreciate you saying that, because I think that is sometimes hard to hear, like students come back and saying, oh, well, you're right. Like, everyone did have this experience and I didn't have this, and so I don't belong here. But I would argue, like, man, like, think of all the things that these students can learn from you, all the different experiences that they haven't had, right? And so, and it may not be all things that relate to like taking the test, but like life experiences are incredibly important, and the cultural capital that they bring is so important. I mean, I've learned so many things from students who have different experiences and different backgrounds than myself. Yep, and YOSO, cultural wealth is great. So thanks for sharing, Matthew. So we have a little bit more time. Any other kind of thoughts or reflections that others want to share?
Hello, this is
Morning.
Doris Ward. I'm from Rusk College. I really enjoyed your, well, all of the presentations, but one of the things that I'm doing, I am at Rusk College. This is a small HBCU, and I am the division chair of STEM, the STEM disciplines. And one of the things that I have observed, I've taught for a lot of years, and one of the things that I found that has been very significant is that students, once they develop the confidence, once they feel comfortable in this discipline, in the STEM disciplines, they do a whole lot better. They get different experiences, but initially I find that they sort of appear to bring with them, the self-efficacy is not there. So what I am proposing to do is I'm going to participate. I guess that's why I'm here. I'm trying to craft a proposal that really, like the previous presentation about urban, the changing and revising curricula. So I know from where I'm standing now, I think it's a tremendous task, but I really do want to get some ideas on, changing curriculum so that it is, particularly in STEM. And I don't know, to what degree, and that's where I'm way out of my field, because as I said, I am a biochemistry person, but I have taught in HBCU, and I recognize this with students. And we basically at this school, we prepare them for graduate school. And I feel that once they graduate, I want, they can handle, I want them to be fully prepared. So I'm trying to craft a proposal on, interventions that can make the, I guess, how the presentation of this material in a culturally relevant way so that my students sort of gain a certain degree of confidence earlier. And I don't have to, I don't mind working with them, but it just would help a lot if they develop this before their junior and senior year or before they go on the internship. So I was just wondering if any of the people there have any ideas of how do you initially start to begin to, craft. As I said, I'm going to, I want to develop a proposal that specifically addresses, changing or revising curriculum to make it more user-friendly, as I call it, for our students.
Debbie, did you have any initial thoughts about this?
So I can't speak directly to STEM, as that is not my area. I think one of the things that we have struggled with in doing curriculum revision is two sort of camps. The camp of, when you do curriculum revision for equity, it's like the whole curriculum has to be equity oriented, right? And we still encounter faculty members who want to approach it as the equity add-on, right? Whether it is an equity add-on class, like here's your STEM program or here's your special ed program, and now here's the class on equity, or it is the equity week in each of the courses. And so, we're about to embark on a pretty significant curriculum revision in our department because our state has new standards for all teachers, and they're culturally responsive teaching and leading standards. And please don't share this outside of the state because I'm afraid people will come and attack us because we're doing the opposite of a lot of the national dialogue right now. But one of the things that we worked on this summer is that prior to redoing the sequence of our courses and the individual courses, we have to do significant faculty development, right? So faculty need to, we're all in very different places, but we need to develop our own sociopolitical understanding. We need to develop our own critical self-awareness. We need to, there's so much work we have to do individually as a faculty member and as a group. And I'm in year 20 now. And I just don't think curriculum revisions will work without doing that faculty work first. And in fact, I just conversation with an undergraduate student yesterday, she's being harmed in a class. She's a Black woman, and she's being harmed in a class as the only apparent student of color. And it's a class where the instructor is doing equity. She's integrated equity, but she doesn't have the deep understanding of what that means. And so we can use words and use terms and assign a reading, but if we don't understand it, then it's too easy to do it in a harmful way. And so that doesn't probably answer your question, except I think we have to do faculty development, and we also have to hold faculty accountable for that development. It has to be part of how we evaluate faculty.
Well, thank you. You did provide a lot, because that's one of the aspects that I as I said, I'm trying to craft a proposal. So that is a vital part of it. Would be a vital part of it, the faculty development and all the other activities that to truly, before to understand what I'm trying to do, so that faculty know what we're trying to do and not just say, okay, revise your syllabus to include this. So you did. Thank you very much.
Good. I'm glad.
Well, we're at time. Thank you all so much for coming. I'm going to believe that everyone who was kind of here and listening in was actually listening in. And sometimes it's early. You got to have your camera off. You're trying to focus. But I just appreciate everyone so much for coming and looking forward to the rest of the conference. I'm sure that I speak for all the presenters that when I say, please feel free to reach out to us with additional questions, or if you want to chat more about anything that we've talked about or learn more about the research that we're doing. So thank you all, and see everybody on the app and at the conference.